Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. It is now Friday, the 20th of September, 2024. Appreciate you tuning in to today's update. Probably won't be a real long one today. Not much has changed overall in this long, slow process that we're seeing beginning to unfold in the Western Caribbean. I talked about that yesterday, that this really is going to be a drawn-out situation, and we're going to literally be watching it unfold in rather slow motion. So let's see where we are with things today. All right, again, thanks for joining in. We'll start first with this Climate Prediction Center and the Madden-Julian Oscillation. The MJO looks like it's going to be moving into phases that are more favorable. Let's use this little blue color here to highlight everything. This is where we are now with the Madden-Julian Oscillation over in phase 6, favoring the Western Pacific with upward motion way up there at the 200 millibar level. And then the guidance suggests these are all the different ensemble plots, and we can kind of turn it into an envelope there. And you get the idea that we're going to be headed towards phases 8 and 1, which favors, you guessed it, the Western Hemisphere and Africa. So it looks like we're heading into a more large-scale favorable pattern. That is the INCEP version, so American models basically. Here's the ECMWF version, and it is very similar. Again, INCEP version, GE, like the GFS and its ensembles and whatnot. And this is the ECMWF, the JMA, which does a real good job with MJO, also showing that. So yes, we should be looking at more favorable conditions in the upper levels of the atmosphere, more rising motion, less sinking motion, starting from west and moving its way to the east. And we can almost begin to see it in the satellite imagery this afternoon. Look, there is a lot more in the way of shower and thunderstorm activity in the vicinity of Central America, the Southeast Pacific, and in the southwestern and western Caribbean Sea. This is important because this is the area that we're going to be watching closely. The air is going to start to converge down here. Trades are going to come in, kind of slow down. Then you're going to get the development of that gyre, and that's going to be very favorable as that Madden-Julian Oscillation moves over the top, so to speak. And then things should get quite favorable to have something try to develop. And you know the routine by now. It is just a matter of which one of these pieces of energy that gets going down here consolidates, and where. Will it be here? Will it be over here? Could it happen in the extreme Southeast Pacific and then try to rotate on? We don't know. But the models are starting to get a little bit closer to figuring out that solution. We are now within maybe 5 days, 6 days for what we call Genesis. I'll show you that as we go forward. But, you know, the beginnings are certainly there, and this is definitely going to take a while. We're talking, at the minimum, 5 more days before we see something perhaps try to develop right in here. That's what the GFS, generally the Canadian, and some different versions of the Euro, just depends on which ensemble member, or if you're looking at the AI version of the Euro. But I would have to think that somewhere in here, that's where we're going to have to be looking down the road once we get to about days 4, 5, and 6, something like that. But right now, really nothing to hang our hats on in terms of the vorticity signature. A little bit more, especially in the East Pac. There's some trying to show up right over Central America. What I want to see in terms of what we're looking for is, do we have something that looks like this over here? Let's just assume that. And if we start to see vorticity concentrating in the Northwest Caribbean Sea, where the modeling is suggesting, some of the modeling anyway, that could happen, then we'll have, certainly more confidence that the modeling is onto something and not just, I don't want to say making things up, but it's not real until it happens. I think we all can agree to that. And we certainly know that the water temperatures are quite warm, especially in this area of the Western and Northwest Caribbean Sea. These are your anomalies, departures from the long-term average, all up into the Gulf of Mexico, certainly warm enough. And, of course, the southwestern and western Gulf, too. We don't know exactly where this is going to happen, if at all. We could end up, by the way, let me just go back over to the vorticity map. We could end up with something that looks like this, and you just transplant that down here, this big elongated area of slop. Very heavy rain, that is an impact, but not the same, obviously, as a well-developed hurricane would be. And we just don't know if that's going to happen. We're going to get a big strung out system, kind of like the whole gyre gets yanked north, or if something concentrates. But if it does that concentrating that we're talking about here, if everything bundles up, especially in this corner right in here, that is an infamous area. That's a prime breeding ground. We've seen a lot of activity get going in that vicinity, maybe even up a little further into the Yucatan Channel. And then it's just a matter of the upper levels cooperating up here and what happens with steering and so forth. But we're getting closer ever so slightly to seeing this come to fruition. And we can see that start to manifest itself over here on the GFS. This is the operational from today's 12Z run. 12Z meaning that it was initialized at 12 Zulu time, 8 a.m. Eastern time. And again, this is the area we're going to really be watching right through here. And this is down at around 5,000 feet in the atmosphere. And that vorticity field that we talk about. So this is this in the future. So this is an analysis, a satellite imagery product. This is the actual computer model, kind of based on that data and a bunch of other data as well. So let's just move this out. I kind of did this yesterday. You're going to see this kind of frequently over the next few days. But this is what it looks like over the next 3 days. Let's go out to 72 hours. And it does get a little bit intriguing down here. You're starting to focus that energy just a little bit more, and most of it is happening here in that area that I was talking about, not as much over in the southeastern Pacific. So that's 3 days out. You figure 72 hours out, you know, something would start to really pop, and we should see that vorticity signature improve, and the satellite imagery will match it, and so forth. So this puts us all the way out to Monday morning. And notice, too, there's your height line of the ridge sitting over the western Atlantic and the southeast U.S. That's going to help keep this down here, and that's an important puzzle piece. It really is. The more this can stay down here and get its act together, the better chance it has of closing something off, getting it concentrated, and then it moves on up into the Gulf, and from there, we certainly have to watch very, very closely. So there's a few pieces of the puzzle that are already starting to fall into place. So let's jump out another 24 hours to day 4. This is 96 hours out. And again, a pivotal moment here. This comes to Tuesday morning. That energy coming together even more here between and across the Cayman Islands down towards the Gulf of Honduras. And we're just going to have to see where does that happen. And I told you, this is 4 days out. That's a long time when you're watching the models every 6 hours. Another thing to look at, too, let's keep an eye on this, the upper level winds. We talked about that favorable MJO pattern setting up. This is part of that. And we do have a favorable upper level environment, generally speaking. Pretty strong winds up to the north, but our system looks to be coalescing more in this area. And we'll just have to watch and see how this evolves with our surface feature, surface up to 5 to 20,000 feet, something like that. The bottom of it, the structure, the foundation. So let's go another day out to hour 120, and this is where I start to really kind of, all right, 5 days out, typical, decent, short range, almost to medium range model guidance. It's not 8 days, it's not 10 days. We can all agree to that. You can see the timestamp up there. This is valid on Wednesday morning. That's 5 days out. And what are we seeing? And this is a huge, I think, pivotal moment for this thing to develop. We do have some energy here in the southeastern Pacific, hugging the coast near Guatemala. Then there's a larger area trying to concentrate here in the Northwest Caribbean Sea. But let's go back to the upper levels again, and let's see which area would promote the most divergence, because down here, you're having convergence. The air is coming together down here, focusing and trying to bundle in this area right here. All right? So we have convergence at the surface. That's very important. We know the water temperatures are warm, so that's a lock. What about the upper levels at day 5? This is exactly what you look for if you're assuming that something's going to try to develop. The upper level pattern, about as ideal as you can ask for, right near the system. The lack of the colors, this little bluish color, shows there's very, very little bit of wind shear. So the wind, the storms can form vertically and they're not going to get torn apart. This is not sitting over here, where it's perfectly oriented over the Southeast Pacific. It's hard for me to conceive that 5 days out, the model, whatever model it is, and these are, we're talking the GFS, Canadian, Euro, the three main ones that we look at, and the UK Met. There's a bunch when you add them all up, right? But just the GFS, which we're looking here specifically, that it's just going to be that wrong 5 days out, because this is a huge weather feature. This is a large synoptic scale feature in the atmosphere that it would be displaced several hundred miles to the west or the southwest 5 days out. That would be a pretty big error in the GFS. It's possible, but I don't see that happening. And so as a detective in all of this, that's what we're trying to figure out. It's like an advanced meteorological version of Blue's Clues. Remember that? Some of you are old enough that you actually watched it. I certainly did with all my kids, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to put these clues together. Except it's Mark's clues and whatever. But seriously, this is the stuff I look for, and it does intrigue me. It's like, all right, so by day 5, there you go. And then day 6, it comes together even more. Arguably, a potential tropical cyclone in there. And I don't mean the Hurricane Center's version. I mean, literally, there could potentially be a tropical cyclone at day 6 there. And then finally at day 7, and that's the extent of how we're going to go out, it's fully formed. And in the Gulf of Mexico, and again, you go look at the upper level dynamics, and yes, it's not ideal, but it certainly is favorable. Pretty strong wind shear, although not detrimental probably over to the west of it, only 20, 25, 30 knots, and it's moving northerly. That's the details we can worry about later. But this does at least make sense to me. But you know what? The opposite could happen, where you get basically this whole thing kind of up here like this, all strung out. That's a possibility too. I don't want to make that very clear. The quicker this can bundle early, the more intense it'll be later on. That's the bottom line. All right? So we will be watching that very closely over the coming days. And just to compare with you, one more model here, the Canadian, the CMC, almost an exact duplicate of what the GFS has, a very similar evolution. It is just farther to the west overall and a much larger system. But the genesis of it is in a very similar area. So it's not completely out to lunch and completely different than the GFS. When we get that divergence in the models, that becomes pretty frustrating because you don't know what to trust. But again, this system, let's go back to the GFS one more time. This is the analysis. There's no vorticity to even track down there to speak of, and we are still at the starting point of this whole process. All right, let's get back over to the thumbnail title page, and I'll say my goodbyes for now anyway. So we'll stay on top of it. I'll do an update tomorrow and on Sunday and on Monday, and then eventually either we have a big, sloppy, drawn-out gyre with heavy rain and whatnot headed for the Gulf Coast, or we could have our next named storm. And with that MJO coming into the Western Hemisphere, I fully expect that we're going to see more development all across the Atlantic Basin. And as we get into October, we're going to start jacking that named storm count and the ACE count. Everything's going to kind of resume again. I doubt we're going to be able to catch up and make that hyperactive mark that we were all anticipating going all the way back to the spring. But you never, ever know for sure. Sometimes the rubber band snaps really hard, and I've said this before, it can come back and really get you in the eye there, and that's what we have to be careful of, that we don't dismiss it as, we all got it wrong, nothing's going to happen. We need to make sure that if that's the case, well, we got to be ready to react in case it's not the case. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's why we're here. Stay on top of it together, and we will do just that. Have yourselves a great weekend. Again, I will be back Saturday and Sunday, and we'll stay on top of this for you. From all of us at Hurricane Track, thanks for tuning in. I'm Mark Sudduth. I'll see you again sometime tomorrow.